born in a ghetto in Greenville, South Carolina, in a house with no electricity or water, in a town where blacks couldn't walk to the white side of Greenville unless they paid a walking tax or had a letter from a white family. His parents taught him how to read and write at a young age from the Bible, and they had named him Joshua after Joshua in the Bible, and they believed that one day he would break down the walls of prejudice in America. At the age of 7, Josh witnessed white deputies beating his minister father to death. Actually, they sent him to a mental institution where he died. But now he had a mother and 4 younger siblings to support at the age of 7. 2 months later, he left town with a blind street singer named Blind Man Arnold. And he was barefoot, ragged shorts. They'd walk on the dangerous dirt roads of Jim Crow South. And he would sing and dance and play the tambourine as Blind Man Arnold sang, collect the coins for him. He became so adept at this that Arnold figured, okay, I send his mother $4 a week to support the family, but I can make more money if I rent him out. Over the next 8 years, he rented him out to 66 other street singers. He walked them as far south as Florida, as far west as to Texas, where he worked with Blind Lemon Jefferson, and as far north as Chicago, where he traveled with Blind Joel Taggart, who recorded for Paramount Records at the time. And he started recording with Taggart at Paramount, and in October 1928, at the age of 14, Paramount gave him his first featured role as a lead singer and lead guitarist in a song called Scandalous and Ashamed. He stayed for another year there. I will add that Paramount was so impressed by him, they threatened Blind Joe Taggart to go to jail if he didn't move him out of the horse stable to a boarding house and buy him his first suit and pair of shoes. He hadn't worn a pair of shoes for 15 years. And he had never gone to school, but he was a very special savant child. And he learned from those 66 guitarists, he learned each of their individual guitar styles until he developed his own unique style. So after staying another year at Paramount as a guitarist and singer, he took his money and went back to Greenville for the first time in years to see his mother and younger siblings. He broke his leg, which left him in bed for a year. But in the meantime, Columbia Records had been sending out two A&R men, Art Satherley and W.L. Calloway, I believe their name was. And they were looking around the country for the young boy who had led all the blind men and knew the reservoir of all their songs. And they found him in Greenville as he was rehabilitating from his broken leg. And he wasn't old enough to sign a contract, so they had to convince his mother, who wasn't easy to convince. She finally agreed to sign the contract if it stipulated that he only record Christian records, because she didn't want him to record the devil's music, the blues. So he came to New York and he started recording the Christian records under Joshua White, the singing Christian. And when he turned 18, he signed another contract with Columbia and started recording all of his blues songs under the name Pinewood Tom. And this led to a very successful career. He was also on the national radio show, Harlem Fantasy, and he had over 80 sides recorded by 1936. And this is, just to give some perspective, this is before Robert Johnson ever went into a recording studio. And, but that year in 36, he put his fist through a glass door, which the doctors wanted to amputate his fist, and he wouldn't allow them, but he couldn't play. He couldn't play the guitar, he couldn't use his hand. And so he And he told Columbia he couldn't sing without his guitar. So he went to a variety of jobs, and at the time he was supporting his mother-in-law, his younger brother, and 2 kids. And so it was very difficult times. And then in 1939, life magically came back to his hand in a card game. Wow. And at the same time, for 6 months, the producers of an upcoming Broadway show called John Henry, which they already had, Paul Robeson agreed to play John Henry. They were looking for this second lead in the show, who was a singing narrator called Blind Lemon. And they all had agreed that the only person they believed could do the vocal right was Pinewood Tom. But they didn't know where Pinewood Tom was. And the musical director saw Josh at a party one night, and he said, are you Pinewood Tom by any chance? No, and he says, I'm an elevator operator. But he stayed up all night and showed up at his house, and the next week he was signed and in rehearsal for Broadway. So all of a sudden, this guy who had disappeared, no one had heard from for 4 years, was on Broadway. And in 1940, while rehearsing, he did an album for Blue Note where he had a popular recording of Careless Love. And this was the first record that black and white people heard in America, because as a race record artist, the white audiences didn't know him. And then John Hammond, who he had worked with at Columbia years earlier, he wanted Josh to do an album of chain gang songs. And this was the first racial protest album ever released. It caused a big controversy down south. And so he was dealing with that, but getting a lot of radio play and interviews. And then John decided to take him down to the Cafe Society. It was the first integrated nightclub in the United States. And he thought Josh had changed dramatically from this rural southern blues guy that he used to work with, and now he was matured, he was handsome beyond belief, they felt, and he was self-educated, he was cosmopolitan, and he gets hired by the Cafe Society, and within 2 years he becomes their biggest attraction. He became the first black male sex symbol in America. Many argued, and it was written, that he was the first black man accepted into white society. And then he had a #1 hit record called One Meatball, an old English ballad that he made into a blues ditty, and it sold 1 million records. And at the same time, while becoming a sex symbol and a star Cafe Society, and recording his albums Chain Gang and the subsequent album Southern Exposure, Franklin Roosevelt calls him at his home and asks him if he would come give a concert at the White House and sing the songs from these 2 albums. It was the first command performance for a black man in America. And he became Franklin Roosevelt's closest black confidant. Eleanor Roosevelt became the godmother to Josh White Jr. And he became a very close confidant and worked with him. He sang at his inauguration in January 1940. Mrs. Roosevelt sponsored him to give a concert in Washington on the 75th anniversary of the abolition of slavery. And but with One Meatball, all of a sudden he had his own national radio show. He was featured in a movie, Crimson Canary. He co-starred with Ethel Waters on Broadway in Blue Holiday, where he featured a song called Free and Equal Blues, which when broadcast on radio caused another big controversy. And so he had all this success. He was the first solo artist to do a concert hall tour of America. That's the popularity he had at the time. And all this happened right before the blacklist hit him in 1947. But during that period, 1944, 45, he started bringing his 4-year-old son, who was a child prodigy, became a child star, and had him perform with him. And I think after we see the video, I then would like to bring Josh White Jr. on stage to accept the
Josh White transitioned from a career as a traditional Piedmont blues artist to emerge as a unique and valued voice in the burgeoning folk music world of the 1940s, and in doing so, played a vital role in introducing new audiences to the blues. White was outspoken in his songs of protest against racism and injustice, a revolutionary tactic among blues singers in his era who had to couch such sentiments in code or hidden meanings in their lyrics. His induction into the Blues Hall of Fame and concurrent honors as Folk Alliance International's 2023 Lifetime Achievement Memorial Award recipient are finally shining the spotlight on an icon whose many contributions have too often been forgotten or overlooked in the years since his death in 1969. Born in Greenville, South Carolina on February 11, 1914, White sang in church as a youngster and got an extended taste of the road by traveling as a guide for blind street singers. White claimed to have led Blind Lemon Jefferson and dozens of others. He also told of suffering beatings and witnessing a lynching. After returning to Greenville, he headed to New York City and launched his own recording career in 1932, chosen as one of a select crew of blues artists who were able to record prolifically in the Depression years. An invitation to appear in a 1940 Broadway play, John Henry, served as an entry into a whole new realm of musical, theatrical, social, intellectual, and political circles. His records, previously marketed to African Americans, changed accordingly to appeal to a predominantly white following. While he always drew on his blues and gospel repertoire, he also incorporated Tin Pan Alley hits, pop tunes, work songs, and folk ballads from various sources. His most popular number, One Meatball, recorded for Ash Records in 1944, was a bigger hit when covered by the Andrews Sisters, and many listeners heard House of the Rising Sun for the first time through White. More momentously, he began addressing segregation, workers' rights, lynching, and other controversial issues in songs such as Defense Factory Blues, Uncle Sam Says, and Jim Crow Train. And Strange Fruit, the haunting vision of lynching, first made famous by Billie Holiday on Keynote and other labels. The resultant promotion drew the attention of President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who met with White and became the first of 3 presidents to invite White to appear at White House functions. Eleanor Roosevelt also became one of White's closest confidants. His other compatriots included Leadbelly, Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, Alan Lomax, Burl Ives, Sonny Terry, and Brownie McGee. However, his protest songs and leftist associations led to a blacklisting during the McCarthy anti-communist era, and he was called to testify before the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1950. But receptive audiences in England and other countries enabled him to keep performing, and he toured and recorded prolifically. While in England, he came out with a book, The Josh White Guitar Method, followed in the US by The Josh White Songbook. He died during heart surgery in Manhasset, New York on September 5th, 1969. His music has lived through his children, especially Josh White Jr., who has been a folk musician virtually all of his life, ever since appearing on stage with his father at Cafe Society as a 4-year-old. As Elijah Wald wrote in Living Blues back in 2001, he did more than any artist until B.B. King to make the blues singer a recognized cultural icon, and his rediscovery as a seminal music giant and a unique American voice is long overdue.
Nobody knows you when you down and out.
It's something to see that. You know, it's something to know And remember, but then you see it, that's my old man. How do I condense 56 years of a full life into 5 minutes? I'll get the best I can. Oh, man. My old man had the first million seller for a black or white person, which began my career at 4. I loafed the first 3 years. After visiting my Uncle Billy at Fort Dix, New Jersey, we were from New York, my dad wrote, Uncle Sam says, depicting the segregation he witnessed. The song got to the ear of someone on FDR's staff, forgive me. The White House called the White House. The White House called the White House and invited him to sing for FDR. Friends told him not to go, but knowing my dad, he not only went, but sang it twice. That started a friendship between the two White Houses. I may have to blow my nose, God. In 1950, my dad received a call from Mrs. Roosevelt, then America's new representative to the United Nations. She was assigned to the task of lifting the spirits of the war-torn people of Europe. She proposed that they do a tour together. She would give a speech, and Dad would give a concert. The tour was such a success that in Stockholm, the concert was moved to the 50,000-seat auditorium stadium. But then he received a telegram from his manager in New York that he had been listed in the first printed list of artists being blacklisted as communist sympathizers. I may have to blow my nose, God.
Yeah.
Tissue.
He was the only one listed as blues singer. He flew back to America, hoping to clear his name, appearing before the House on American activities. He never named names. My father died on the operating table in 1969 after suffering my son. He looks more like my old man than I do. Oh, I tell him your name.
Yeah, you might.
Oh, maybe Josh White the third.
That would be me.
Okay, thank you, son. All right, where am I? Oh, yeah. I was on my first solo tour from New York to Alaska. It had been postponed for 3 days. Oh, come on, Mike. Buddha.
Yeah.
Come here. Were you smart by blowing it? In 1998.
Get my readers.
Yeah, that's right. I'm old enough. In 1998, Josh White was honored with a U.S. postage stamp with Woody Guthrie, Lead Belly, and Brownie McGee, the first folk artists to be put on a stamp.
Hold on, I gotta interject that. So, it was so cool. I've got 4 sisters. To send them a birthday card with your father as the stamp.
Honestly, I can go one step further because it was really cool to get a letter from my father, Josh White Jr., addressed to me, Josh White III, with a Josh White postage stamp. My grandmother knew that this was going to happen, but unfortunately, she died before the stamp actually came into life.
She knew it was going to happen before she died, just never saw it.
My aunt's birthday cards arrived in the mail that year with their father's stamp on them. In 2021, a commemorative statue was installed in my grandfather's birthplace in Greenville, South Carolina. Earlier this year, the Folk Alliance awarded my grandfather,
My old man.
his old man, a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Yeah.
And now there's this honor. Josh White's induction into the Blues Foundation's Blues Hall of Fame. On behalf of my grandmother, my aunts, my father, our family, his children, that would be one of me. Well, there's two of us, but anyway. The copious amounts of grandchildren that we have, and those of us who are coming in the future that are not here yet, we all want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
As I work to live out his legacy, I am reminded of the words of my old man. If not now, when? If not us, who? We'll see.